taking all this at face value, which I believe I do, that being gay Christian is okay, it's validated by God, loved, equally accepted. How do we then move from that position to the position of looking at who is allowed to marry? Because you're looking at gay is okay, but then, well, how do you move from there to, well, it's okay for two men to marry, two women to marry, or two opposite gender people to marry?
So, two opposite gender people?
Male, female, different gender.
Well, they can already marry, can't they?
Yep.
Okay.
So how does it move with putting everybody on that same level? So.
Oh, the marriage bit. See, I guess this is a bit of a monologue response, really. Probably everyone would have different views around this. I think that in the long term, personally, it's a mistake to have state-recognised marriages, which is actually a really recent phenomenon. I think it was only around the time of the Industrial Revolution that they started really, like, you're not married unless it's recognised by the state. I know that in some ancient city-states, they would keep a register, but a person was understood to be married if they'd done the right rituals, essentially. Or in ancient Israelite society, you're married when you're paid your bride price. Like, it's a commercial transaction when the money's received. So there was no necessity until very recently in society for the state to recognise whether people are married or not. So when it comes to marriage equality, the reason why I support it is partially because I think we need to move beyond that limited state government view of marriage, which essentially turns marriage into a contract, a legal contract, instead of being what the Bible would refer to as a covenant, like a promise two people are making to each other. It doesn't really answer your question yet, though, does it?
No.
I think that marriage equality is a step towards a more biblical understanding of what marriage is about. But I don't think it takes us all the way there, because marriage is something that happens when two people are committed to each other. And that commitment models the commitment that God has for God's people. That's my understanding of what marriage is. It's a very sacramental understanding of what marriage does. And as churches, we need to be modelling that instead of, I guess, patriarchal family structures, which in my mind are quite worldly. Sorry, I may still not have answered the question.
My understanding of a state-recognised marriage, and I like the church recognising it as well, is that we don't want to have patriarchal societies, but we do have property, and we want to recognise the mutuality of that property. I lobbied hard for the Civil Union Bill because of people in my congregation that it affected, because they had a lot of money and they had nephews that if one of them died might decide it belonged to them because there was no relationship between the two lesbian women.
Yeah.
And I had a big argument, long argument with Stephen Franks on the select committee about that, who said that the law covered it anyway.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the more pieces of paper you put in front of a judge, the better. But for the couple in my congregation, this was important to them.
Yeah.
And the fact that if one of them was sick, the other one might be barred from seeing them if they were very sick. And little things like that, that I think it's good that the state recognises this and says this is where it is and you can't argue with it.
Yeah.
And I had another thought that got away.
You know, it's...
But it's about mutuality
Yeah.
to me. I mean, if you look at the biblical views of marriage, you've got slave marriage and you've got polygamy and you've got you can't say the biblical view, I don't think.
No.
But in a society that has grown out of a Christian heritage, we're looking at a mutual. Anyway, that's enough sermon from me. You'll be pleased I'm going home at lunchtime.
And we'll miss you.
We do have this this constant challenge that comes around. And I've got a very diverse family, very supportive family, and one segment or arm of the family which is kind of like our black sheep, but very kind of ultra-conservative. They have interesting conversations on Facebook, and then we agree to disagree until the next time. Where the constant concept that they keep coming back to is the biblical view of marriage is there for the husband to dictate to the wife what happens, that there's two different roles which he defines as being supportive of each other but have mutually different jobs. The husband tells the wife what to do, the wife doesn't, which is of course equal. And from that you produce children, which is the intention of marriage. To try, for my concept of an understanding of marriage is a way that God's recognising two people living together in a way that is supporting and enabling each other to kind of live the way that God is intended, like to live by those values and those belief systems and live together in that way. Is there an easy way to try and kind of combat the type of conversations that you have by people with very strong views, and that this is the structure that they keep putting forward of going, this is what marriage is, to try and actually perhaps explain it or refer to some kind of rationale about why the type of view of marriage that they have of this one person at the top dictates to everybody how things are, and the whole purpose of the entire relationship is to make babies.
I always think of it as family, and that everybody should have family, and family is somebody who you, or people, can be people, but that you live with in that close-knit family unit, which means that it's a person who you have chosen to live with forever, and to love and to honour, and that's what you've both chosen, and everybody deserves that. And so if you are gay, you still deserve that. And so that's why gays should be able to marry.
I think you asked anyone with a conservative opinion to say, well, what were in your vows?
Yes.
Yeah.
Honour and obey.
Well, no, I really like the fact that a lot of the times that the marriage vows that are taken are what Ruth said to Naomi. It was actually said from a woman saying to another woman, and that's what people use as their marriage vows.
She's committing herself to a mother-in-law, which is really interesting. Not many young women would want to do that.
Because I play at weddings all the time. I've been to hundreds and hundreds of them, and it's what people put in their vows, and then people write their own vows.
Yes.
And a lot of people do that more and more, and you think, well, what's really important to you about your marriage is what you said, your vows, and there's a lot of the core of it is right there. And they don't mention babies. No. Babies never come up with
At the vow making stage, babies are far, far, far from them.
Yeah, because the reason they, well, most of the reason that people get married in the Western culture is that they love each other. And, they're committing that before God, and that's the purpose of what it's all about.
See, I would want to say that I think the image of marriage that is given in the Bible, and I take it right back to Genesis, and that this is a companion suitable for you, or literally this is a companion who will be equal to you. I think people don't realise how anti-patriarchal that is. And this is, I wish I had more days to run the conference, because there's so much that we could get into about the way that Jesus really outspokenly challenged patriarchal society by living in households, such as the household of Mary and Martha, which is described as Martha's household. Now, people don't understand how jarring that is to an ancient Mediterranean ear. Martha is described as being the head of the household, which means it's a matriarchal household. That's completely wild. And then the first thing that happens is her sister sits at the feet of Jesus and learns. Again, we think, oh, well, it just looks like she's being a submissive woman. It's for a woman to be the disciple of a rabbi, again, is this really bold claim of equality with men. And I think that that is completely consistent with the vision of creation as people who are in the image of God and equal with each other. And then the liberation from Egypt and Leviticus's attempt to put limits on how much a patriarch can domineer people in his household. Not to overthrow patriarchy yet, because Levitical society probably could not have afforded to have overthrown the household. It wouldn't have worked. But put as many limits on it as you can so that patriarchs can't dominate. And then Jesus saying, unless you leave your mother and your father and you follow me and you don't turn back and you don't make provisions for their burial, you cannot be a part of this kingdom. Like, essentially, this is Luke 9. I'm giving you a choice. Stay with patriarchal family or be my disciple. And so it's this discipleship or patriarchy. And it's in very black and white terms. Which side are you going to be on? In Matthew, one of the key, and this is towards the end of the gospel where Jesus is giving instructions on the Mount of Olives. I'm about to die, I'm about to go away, this is how you are to live. Call no one on earth Father, for you have only one Father who is in heaven. And I always thought Jesus was talking about Catholics, because in the fundamental that I was raised in, Catholics, they call the priest Father, so they're disobeying Jesus, so they're wrong. But there's no church at this point. Jesus is not addressing a situation in a church. Call no one on earth Father. Again, do not be part of a patriarchal unit, because that is directly opposed to the discipleship of equality that I'm introducing. And in a society like Rome, which was one of the most highly developed patriarchal systems. It's basically like a pyramid scheme where the uber patriarch is Caesar, and then you have local kings like Herod and governors like Pilate who are part of Caesar's patriarchal household, and then all of the local patriarchs are part of the household of the local king, and then you have male citizens, but they all come under a patriarch. It's incredibly militant. And Jesus is saying, look, we're going up to the mountain, and I'm going to talk to you about the lily and the birds of the air, and living like those things, and not calling anyone your father. And in fact, you've got to leave that structure behind. It's a complete alternative lifestyle. So to me, that is the core message of the gospel, which Paul is trying to work out with great difficulty, and I'm glad I wasn't in his shoes. How are we going to make this dream a reality in all of these Greco-Roman cities across the Mediterranean? How are we going to live this in Rome? How are we going to live it in Corinth? And he takes situations as they come and tries to negotiate, what would it look like for us to live the gospel in this city? What we need to be doing now is writing an epistle to Christchurch and saying, how are we going to take that original discipleship and live that out here in this city? I don't think upholding traditional family patriarchal values is even a possibility as a way of expressing that.
For me, kind of, the elephant in the room is always that if you ask evangelical men, or most evangelical Christians, about marriage, it has to do with sex and it has to do with children, but that's the only, that's the only godly way that you have sex. That's what it's about. You ask my parents today, that's the defining moment. And it's okay.
Okay.
That's what it's
I don't think
about. I know. I sometimes struggle with the mindset to get out of that as well a little bit. But if you go to C1 Church, what is it, or Grace Vineyard, any of those youth groups, young people, that's
Institutional marriage.
these two are now they're engaged, but heaven forbid they wouldn't do anything that they shouldn't. And then once they're married, on their special night, that's when it happens. That's marriage. And the rest shall follow.
I wonder how much of their congregation are living up to that though.
Yeah.
Well, there was a survey done. I don't know if you heard of the Society of Salt and Light, which is a young adults thing in Christchurch. Started sort of from the Anglicans, but quite interdenominational, certainly with Protestants anyway. And they had a night on sex, and they did a survey, and there was a high percentage. So the room's full of youth pastors, and other young adults from Christchurch churches. And the survey was that most people in the room said that they had certain rules around their sexuality that basically mean, no sex until you get married, and then it's all good. And the same percentage, which is more than 50% of the people in the room, had not lived up to their expectations.
How many?
More than 50%.
More than 50%.
So it's not necessarily the same group hadn't lived up to their expectations, but a large proportion of the group had expectations of themselves, which was no sex until marriage, and approximately the same percentage of the group had violated their expectations.
Which makes them feel really bad about themselves.
So, yes, they get guilt. The
Yeah.
woman I've quoted a couple of times from my Hamilton congregation was a doctor in the sexual health clinic. And it was a regular occurrence for her to say to me, "Oh, it's parachute this weekend. I'll be busy next week."
Oh yeah. Well, that's what happens when you have a music festival, Christian or otherwise.
Yeah, but because she was always got at, she always needed to mention it, and always needed to mention that these young people who are going to sleep in separate tents and so forth, they would be all in her office in the next week.
And I remember going to, when I went to Memphis earlier this year, and literally there were more Baptist churches than there were houses. I don't know how like massive Baptist churches everywhere, and you go down a street. The street that I was staying on had 3 Baptist houses, Baptist churches just next to each other, like they were neighbours. And each of them had congregations of over 1,000 people, so I don't know where all these people were living. But everywhere Baptist. And then someone showed me this map that someone had rather cleverly put together, which was a map of America with Baptists on it. And you can see there's this kind of, the southeastern Florida, Memphis, Tennessee, Texas, all that stuff is Baptists here. And then they did teen pregnancies. It was identical.
Yeah.
Baptists and teen pregnancies, and
It's funny when
diabetes,
you do statistics.
and sorry?
Heart disease.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff, but sexually transmitted diseases, all this kind of stuff. And poverty as well, actually, was the other one. Right in the same area. And it's like, the ones that are preaching the most fervently against sex are the ones that are living up to it the least. Jesus said, "Judge the teaching by its fruits." And it seems that the liberals, with their wacky sexual ethics, are much managing their sexuality in much more beneficial ways. If you just take it to the level of harm or what people want to achieve in their life, are actually managing their lives much better. So why don't we look at the fruit of things and think about the teaching of Jesus around the fruit? You look at the fruit of anti-gay teaching, and you've got people losing their faith, people being cut off from their families, massive rates of mental illness and suicide amongst communities. If that's the fruit, then Jesus seems to say you reassess what is the cause of this. Is it someone's phone?
It's not on silent. Not on silent, but
Sometimes the vibrator is like
Yeah.
louder than the actual ringtone.
Your equipment, Catherine.
Marian's.
It's because she turned off my daughter had her first child. We were living in Arkansas, and time about some fringes about it. And the problem was, of course, that she was being taught by everybody around her that sex before marriage wasn't okay, and that, so she'd committed to no sex before marriage, and didn't go on contraception because she wasn't going to ever have marriage before she, sex before she got married, and then of course had a baby, because it was totally unprotected sex, and it was happening everywhere. So she was exactly, one of those sort of American statistics.
So that's how the young evangelicals are not, they're not prepared for it,
No.
because they're not going to have it. In
They
their mind,
really
they're
believe
not going to do it.
Yeah.
And then they do it, and
And then you have to deal with that too. So you're not only dealing with the unexpected pregnancy, but you're dealing with all the guilt that goes with that. That this wasn't, under God, I wasn't going to do this. Awful.
Also the fact that this is happening. I mean, evangelical faith is you only have marital sex, but it is happening outside of it anyway. The question is that right or is it wrong?
It's a really awkward
That's
situation.
what it's about.
I mean, I think the deal really is in the conservative church. Everyone slips up every now and then, but if you repent, then that's okay. So the problem is when a homosexual person adopts a lifestyle of sin, when they're not repenting between encounters, then that's the problem. But what that looks like in practice, even though it sounds like it makes sense, is if you have a series of one-night stands, then that's okay. But if you have a relationship that's lasting, that's the real sin, which is the exact opposite situation from, and of course they wouldn't
And that's where
express it
I've
in
come
those
to
terms.
believe that marriage equality is the right thing, because it doesn't make sense. If I say I don't think anybody should have marriage before sex before marriage. Well, Freudian slip.
Something to be said for that.
If I think that nobody should have sex before they're married, then I'm saying that a homosexual can never have sex if I also say that they can't get married.
True.
And I'm also setting them up, as you say, for sin, to fail, because I'm saying, no, as soon as you have an actual boyfriend, or a girlfriend if you're a woman, then you're openly sinning. As you say, and it just doesn't work. That doesn't make sense.
And the church
Because
has done that
surely it's
sometimes
better to be in a committed relationship than to be jumping from person to person, whether you're same sex or different sex.
There's a bit I say in the marriage liturgy that I've evolved that says that marriage is good for society. I can't remember the exact words. But I would hold that to be true of both same-sex marriage and heterosexual marriage, because you've got a stable relationship that other relationships within the society build on.
Yeah.
And it's for the benefit of the whole community.
Yeah, it is.
I think
Promiscuity is the problem, isn't it, regardless of which sexuality?
Yeah.
I think there's something that Matthew Bynes brings up in his videos. That you watch the video on that he goes through all the clever passages, and he says that it's not just about denying sex; it's also about denying love. It goes further than that, because a lot of people will view gay people as just having sex rather than falling in love. And you're not saying no, you can't have sex. You're saying you might meet someone that you start having feelings for. You've got to deny falling in love. And then because society then doesn't approve of it in the same way, but it celebrates falling in like romantic love. Valentine's Day happens every year. It's in your face. And there's people falling in love and having romantic relationships all the time. It's an ideal that society upholds. But then says to a gay person, no, you can't have that. And it's not just about having sex. It's like, no, you can't actually fall in love. And that's a much deeper thing as well.
But even on the societal level that I spoke about, I've been married for more than 40 years, and we interact with society with much more strength than either of us would individually. And that's got to be a benefit. It's a benefit for each of us, but it also supports what we do.
Very much then.
Well, it's probably lunchtime. I think lunch has not yet arrived.
I think it'll be here very shortly.